The village of Kumbesa simmered under a harsh sun, its dusty paths buzzing with market day activity. Cries of traders, bleating goats, and the clang of metal against wood formed a familiar chorus. But on this particular day, everything changed in a single brutal moment. Halima stood in the center of the square, her face twisted with rage as she lashed out again and again at a girl who neither flinched nor defended herself. Her name was Leya, and the blows had become as routine as morning prayers. Leya was the daughter of a man who had long disappeared, leaving her in the care of a woman who never wanted her. Halima had treated her more like a nuisance than a human being, assigning her chores that never ended and punishments that never needed reason. The villagers had grown used to the girl's quiet suffering. In a place where everyone fought their own battles, no one had the time to defend someone else's war. But today, as Halima beat Leya with a stick in the middle of the street, something was different. A man on horseback had stopped. His horse, sensing something in the air, slowed on its own. The man dismounted not with urgency but with purpose. Sefu was known around the village as a man of silence and solitude. He lived alone at the edge of the hills, tending his land and minding his business. But today, his gaze locked onto the scene with unspoken fury. He walked toward them. The crowd parted with unease. Even the children, who normally ran wild around the stalls, froze. Halima's hand was raised again when Sefu's voice cut through the heat like a blade. "Don't strike her again. Give her to me." The sentence stunned everyone. Halima blinked, then let out a cruel laugh. "Take her," she spat. "Let's see how long you last with that useless thing." Her voice was a venomous coil. "She's free. You owe me nothing." Leya didn't move. Her scraped knees quivered, but she kept her eyes glued to the ground. Freedom? The word sounded like fiction. No one had ever offered her a choice. Not in words, not in actions. She couldn't trust it. Sefu didn't repeat himself. He didn't coax her. He just turned and began walking. The crowd remained silent, confused, perhaps a little afraid. And Leya, unsure why her legs obeyed, followed. Not because she believed she was free, but because behind her there was only pain, and ahead of her walked someone who had, for the first time, told Halima to stop. The path to Sefu's farm stretched away from the market through a tunnel of old trees whose branches bowed low as if carrying secrets too heavy to share. The air was quieter here. Leya kept a steady pace behind him. She didn't know where they were going or what would become of her, but the absence of shouting was strangely comforting. Sefu occasionally glanced back to see if she was still following. He never said a word. She never asked a question. When they reached a wooden gate with rusted hinges, he unlocked it with a key that groaned like tired iron. Beyond it stood a modest clay house with a worn porch and a roof that looked like it had weathered decades of storms. He pointed to the structure and said simply, "You'll sleep there. There's bread and water inside. If you want them." Then he walked away toward the shed. Leya stepped inside, her feet tentative like she was intruding. The room smelled of ash and something faintly sweet. A bed with a faded sheet, a small pitcher of water, and a folded mat in the corner. She sat on the edge of the bed, not daring to lean back. Her hands were still dirty, her body aching. She looked around as if expecting someone to yell, to hit, to throw her out. But there was only silence. That night she lay still for a long time. And for the first time in years she fell asleep without sobbing. There were no dreams. Just the heavy breath of someone who had survived the day. And sometimes, that is more than enough to start again. The wooden gate creaked closed behind them, sealing off the noise of the village like a chapter ending. Leya stood inside the compound of Sefu's farm, unsure if she had entered a home or another kind of cage. Her legs ached, her wrists still bore the ghost of Halima's grip, and her chest felt too tight to allow hope. The clay house in front of her was simple, a structure of labor, not love, with red earth walls, a rusted tin drum beside the door, and a straw broom leaning in the corner like an afterthought. Inside, the air smelled of smoke, maize, and something older. The quiet was so complete it roared. Leya hovered at the threshold of the room he had pointed to earlier. The open door revealed a bed with a blue-tinged sheet, faded and threadbare at the corners, and a wooden stool holding a pitcher of water. A straw mat was folded against the wall. She didn't know whether to sit or wait. Her body obeyed its training: stay still, stay invisible. Sefu didn't return immediately. After showing her the room, he had walked off toward the rear shed, his presence like smoke, thick but leaving no trace. Leya stepped inside the room slowly, half expecting someone to shout at her for crossing a line. Her toes curled against the hard-packed earth floor, and her fingers brushed the edge of the bed cautiously, as if touching something too precious for her calloused hands. She sat down but didn't lie back. She didn't know if she was allowed to. That night passed in heavy silence. She didn't eat the bread. She didn't drink the water. The fear of misstepping was greater than her hunger. She lay curled on the edge of the bed like a bird not yet convinced its cage had opened. The sheet felt too clean, the room too still, and her heart too heavy to believe she was safe. But sleep came, a deep, exhausted slumber with no dreams, no flinching. Only breathing. At dawn, Leya woke to the sound of goats braying in the distance and birds chirping like they didn't know how to stop. She sat up slowly. Her muscles ached, but the absence of pain from someone else's hand was jarring. The small pitcher of water was still full. She washed her face in silence and stepped outside, unsure of where to go or what to do. Sefu wasn't in sight, but smoke drifted from the back of the compound. She followed it quietly. There he was, Sefu, crouched beside a pot over a fire, feeding dry sticks into the flames. He didn't look up, didn't speak, but he slid a second bowl toward the edge of the cooking stone. Leya stopped a few feet away, unsure if it was for her. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but shame and suspicion argued against it. He spoke without lifting his head. You'll need strength. Still she didn't move. It was too surreal, kindness in the form of food, not fists. She lingered for a long time, then step by step, approached and crouched near the bowl. She waited until he moved away entirely before reaching for it. The porridge was plain, hot, and clung to her throat like something unfamiliar. But it filled her. When she looked up again, Sefu was already walking into the field with a hoe on his shoulder. That day set the rhythm. No one gave her orders. No one beat her. She swept the porch, gathered water from the drum, and scrubbed pots that didn't belong to her, simply because it felt unnatural not to work. Sefu returned after the sun had passed its peak. He said nothing as he dropped his tools, washed his hands at the basin, and ate what was left in the pot. When night fell, he handed her a small bundle. Inside was a bar of ash soap and a piece of cloth. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. She accepted it with a small nod. In the days that followed, a fragile routine bloomed. He left early for the fields. She woke just after him. The gate creaked open at dawn and groaned closed at dusk. They didn't speak much, but gestures became their vocabulary. Bread left on the table. A broom replaced without being asked. A bucket of clean water always waiting. And always silence. But it wasn't the silence of punishment anymore. It was the silence of space, unspoken respect. Like untouched soil, it waited for something to grow. And though Leya didn't yet know it, something had already begun to root itself deep within her. Not trust, not yet, but the idea that perhaps one day she might not have to flinch. Not from voices. Not from footsteps. Not even from kindness. The third morning came with mist rolling low over the fields. A cool hush settled on the farm like a blanket, and Leya stepped outside before the sun had fully risen. She swept the yard in slow, deliberate strokes, dust curling up around her ankles. Her back ached, but she didn't mind. It was the kind of ache that came from purpose, not punishment. Inside the house, Sefu sat at the table, chewing slowly on a piece of roasted maize. He didn't speak when Leya entered to rinse out the cooking pot. But he slid another piece of maize toward the edge of the table before leaving, his boots thudding softly against the earth as he headed back into the fields. Leya paused, eyeing the maize. It was warm. Slightly charred on the edges, the way she liked it, though she never told anyone. She took it in her hands and ate slowly. Not because she was savoring it, but because she wasn't used to things that were given without strings. Each bite tasted of confusion, gratitude, and something she didn't yet have a name for. Afterward, she rinsed the dishes, folded a towel she found draped over a chair, and stood in the doorway watching the morning unfold. By noon, Sefu had returned briefly to refill a water jug and retrieve his wide-brimmed straw hat. He nodded at her, just once, then left again. Leya spent the afternoon organizing the utensils, scrubbing the floor, and untangling a ball of string she found in a drawer. Small aimless tasks, but they anchored her. They reminded her she was here, alive, safe, unbruised. That night, a chill crept in earlier than usual. A wind rustled through the trees and slipped beneath the door. Leya rubbed her arms and huddled on the edge of her bed, unsure what to do. A single thin wrapper wasn't enough to hold back the cold. She curled tighter and closed her eyes, hoping sleep would come quickly. But minutes later she heard a gentle knock. Not loud. Not urgent. Just a presence. When she opened the door, Sefu stood there holding a folded blanket. He didn't speak. He extended it toward her, then turned and left. Leya took it slowly like it might vanish. It was thicker than her wrap and smelled faintly of firewood and dust. She lay back down, pulled it over herself and felt the warmth seep into her bones. She didn't cry but she didn't smile either. Her heart was too tender for either. Over the next week something subtle shifted. Sefu never asked for help. He never demanded chores. Yet Leya began doing them, not out of fear but instinct. The porch was always swept. The cooking pots gleamed. Wildflowers began appearing in chipped bowls and clay jars. Yellow ones, the kind her mother used to pick on long walks before the world turned cruel. She didn't even realize she was humming one morning until she caught herself mid-melody while scrubbing the floor. It startled her. Sound from her own lips? Uninvited? She glanced around nervously but no one had heard. Or so she thought. That same day when she returned to her room after washing her wrapper, a fresh loaf of bread rested on the table, still warm. And beside it a single yellow flower. Plucked, deliberate, not wind-fallen. She stared at it, her throat tightening. Her fingers trembled as she reached out and touched the petals, soft as breath. That night, dinner was shared in silence. Sefu sat at the table longer than usual. The air between them was not thick with words but with something denser, the weight of mutual noticing. When she whispered, "Thank you," it wasn't loud enough to cross the room but it was enough. Sefu rose without a word, retrieved a fresh candle and set it on her bedside table. It was the smallest gesture. But it lit something deep inside her. In the stillness of that house something was growing, not love, not yet, but regard. Respect. A kind of kindness that did not need to be spoken to be felt. Leya began to walk a little straighter. Her shoulders, long hunched in fear, started to square. And Sefu, the man with calloused hands and eyes that rarely lingered, began to notice that the girl who had followed him silently from the market wasn't a shadow anymore. She was becoming something else entirely, something luminous. Not because he rescued her, but because in giving her space he had let her rescue herself. The winds of Kumbesa didn't just carry dust, they carried stories. And once a story found its way to the market, it scattered like loose seeds on dry ground. By the second week of Leya's stay at Sefu's farm, her name, once forgotten, was suddenly the subject of every hushed conversation at the well, the bakery and the cloth dyer's stall. Auntie Fari, the seamstress with a tongue sharper than her needles, was the first to fan the flames. "He brought her straight into his house," she whispered while threading a needle with shaky fingers. "Like you'd carry a chicken from the market. Didn't even blink." Another woman leaned in, giggling behind her hand. "She must be special. Or maybe he's just lonely. Who takes in a girl that broken without wanting something back?" The laughter was cruel but low, like thunder that hadn't made up its mind. No one dared speak such things in front of Sefu. He had always been respected but not loved. His silence unnerved people. His eyes seemed to weigh every soul. The children didn't run to him. The elders nodded but never invited him for palm wine. He lived like a shadow, present but never fully part of the village. So the gossip never reached his ears directly. But Leya heard it. She heard it in the pauses when she passed, in the narrowing of eyes, in the snickers that came a second too late. She never responded. She kept sweeping, scrubbing and tending to the clay pots. But each whisper pressed against her skin like a tiny thorn. She wasn't sure what was worse, being invisible or being seen the wrong way. One afternoon, Sefu asked a neighbor, Musa, to help fix the corral fence. They worked in silence, driving nails into dry wood, tying rope around splintered joints. In the distance they heard a woman call out. "I heard he even serves her food now." Serves her? Maid or wife, who can tell the difference? Laughter followed, light and poisonous. Sefu paused, hammer midair. His jaw clenched. He didn't say anything. He drove the nail in harder, once, twice, 3 times, until the wood cracked slightly beneath the force. Musa said nothing, sensing the shift in air. That evening, as the sky turned apricot and goats bleated in the distance, Leya was sweeping the porch. Sefu returned from the field, his shirt stained with dust, and paused at the gate. His hands were at his sides, fists closed. His eyes didn't meet hers at first. "They're saying I bought you," he said finally, voice low, controlled. Leya's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the broom. Shame wrapped around her like a snake. She couldn't meet his gaze. Bought. That word had always followed her. It was the label her stepmother used, the curse she wore. "I didn't," Sefu said. "I bought your freedom. Nothing more." His voice was not soft. It was not poetic. But it was honest, like dry ground cracking open after long drought. He owed her no explanations, and yet for the first time he gave her one, not for the village but for her. Leya nodded slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. but in her eyes something settled. Not affection, not yet. But a kind of agreement. A silent recognition that whatever they were building, slowly, uncertainly, it was real. The whispers didn't stop, of course. They evolved as all gossip does. Now they claimed Sefu let the girls sleep in late. That she walked about like she owned the place. That maybe, just maybe, she had some kind of spell on him. But despite their eagerness, no one confronted him directly. One day Auntie Fari tried. She saw Sefu at the seed stall inspecting okra. She leaned in with a sly smile. That girl's settling in, eh? Some say she's already running the farm. Sefu looked up. His stare was heavy, anchored. I take care of what's mine, he said, voice even. And of other people's freedom too. Fari's grin faltered. She looked away, suddenly fascinated by a cracked tomato. After that, the gossip didn't die. It simply lost its momentum. Because nothing fuels a rumor like secrecy. But when the truth stands tall in daylight, there's less to chew on. Back at the farm, Leya walked a little taller. She still didn't speak much. But when she did, her voice was steadier. And though the village still wrestled with its suspicions, the girl who had once been dragged through dust now stood under the same sky with bare feet and unbent shoulders. And sometimes that was louder than any defense. The wind in Kumbesa shifted without warning. One day the sun baked the fields dry and cracked the ground into patterns like broken clay. The next, a chill swept down from the mountains, sneaking under doors and into lungs. That's when the coughing started. It was soft at first. Leya would stifle it in the crook of her elbow, careful not to make a sound. She kept sweeping the porch, washing the dishes, gathering water from the drum. But by the third day the cough turned deep and painful, curling her spine each time it came. Her limbs felt like they were filled with sand. Her breath came shallow and sharp. Still she said nothing. Suffering in silence was what she had always known. The fever arrived like an uninvited guest, burning from the inside out. That night she didn't get up. Her room, always neat, became a map of her decline. The jug of water remained untouched. The blanket twisted in her sleep. The window, half open, let the cold wind roam freely across her damp skin. Sefu noticed her absence not because the chores weren't done, but because the silence had changed its shape. It wasn't the silence of privacy or peace, it was the silence of something missing. He called her name once. No answer. He called again, louder. Still nothing. He pushed open her door. The sight stopped him. Leya lay curled on the bed, face flushed a deep red, eyes half-lidded in a fevered haze. Her lips were dry, her hair stuck to her forehead, and her hand hung limply over the edge of the mattress, trembling faintly. Her breaths came fast, shallow, broken. Sefu didn't speak. He didn't panic. He turned and walked quickly to the kitchen, filled a bucket with cold water and found a clean cloth. He knelt beside her, wrung out the cloth and placed it gently on her forehead. Then her neck. Then her wrists. His hands, usually so firm and sure in the fields, trembled as they worked. He remembered watching his grandmother care for the sick in his childhood, how she would sit through the night, humming prayers and whispering songs to fevered children. He didn't remember the words, but he remembered the rhythm. So he copied it. Clumsy but filled with intention. He stayed by her side the whole night. Every time she stirred, he was there with another damp cloth. Every time she moaned, he whispered, "You're safe. You're not alone. No one's going to touch you here." He said it like a mantra, not knowing if she heard, not caring. Sometimes faith is just choosing to stay. The second night was harder. Her fever climbed again. She thrashed once, tried to sit up, then collapsed back onto the bed. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and wild. Where am I?" she rasped. "Here," Sefu said firmly, holding her hand in his. "You're here. With me. And you're safe." The word "here" had never meant so much. It wasn't just a location. It was a promise. A boundary. A declaration. Leya blinked once, as if understanding flickered at the edge of her fever. Then she slept again. That night, Sefu didn't sleep at all. He sat by the edge of her bed, sometimes humming a broken melody, sometimes just watching her chest rise and fall with every difficult breath. He prayed, not in the formal way the village elders taught, but in the quiet desperation of someone who feared losing what he wasn't sure he had yet. On the third morning the fever broke. Slowly. Like dawn peeking through thick clouds. Leya's breathing steadied. Her skin, once burning, turned warm but bearable. Her eyes opened, dazed but clear enough to see the man slumped in a stool beside her, head resting on folded arms, asleep at last. She didn't speak. She simply watched. For the first time in her life someone had stayed. Not out of obligation. Not out of control, but out of care. Later that morning, Sefu woke with stiff limbs and a sore neck. He made tea from bitter mwanza leaves as he'd seen the old women do. Leya tried to refuse, but he handed it to her with a quiet authority. Drink. It's awful but it helps. She did. She coughed, winced and wiped her mouth. Then she looked at him and whispered, "Thank you." Sefu didn't respond with words. But his lips curved, just slightly, into something between a smile and a sigh of relief. Something had changed between them and neither of them had a name for it yet. But they both knew. Sometimes the fiercest love is forged in the stillness of a sick room. Not from grand gestures. But from firelight. From folded blankets. From someone choosing to stay. Recovery came slowly. Leya's body, fragile from years of neglect and now the fever, moved with care. But her eyes, those deep dark eyes, held a new light. It wasn't joy, not yet. But it was something close to steadiness. She stood longer. Sat straighter. Walked with the cautious grace of someone remembering how to live inside her own skin. Sefu watched her, but not like a man watches a guest. He observed her with quiet respect, noting the way she touched the sheets before making the bed, the way she smoothed her hair before stepping outside, the way she folded the towel 3 times instead of 2. She wasn't just healing. She was rearranging herself. The illness had broken something open in the space between them. It hadn't brought declarations or loud feelings. It had brought stillness and presence. And that was more powerful than either of them understood. One Saturday morning, the sky was clear but tired-looking, as though the clouds had been up all night telling secrets. Sefu went into the village to trade sacks of beans and buy new seed. He moved through the stalls with his usual silence, nodding at vendors, ignoring the whispers. But then something caught his eye. At a small fabric stall, hanging between rows of gingham and threadbare cotton, was a dress. Light fabric. Dotted with small white flowers. Simple. Modest. But it reminded him of something, or maybe someone. He couldn't quite explain it, but he stood there longer than he intended, fingers brushing the hem. He bought it. Didn't haggle. Didn't ask questions. Just folded it carefully and tucked it beneath his arm. On the way back to the farm, he didn't think about what he would say. He just kept walking, the weight of the dress light but meaningful against his side. That evening, while Leya swept the kitchen, he slipped into her room and laid the folded bundle gently on her bed. No note. No explanation. Then he walked out and stoked the firewood like nothing had happened. Leya discovered it later. She stared at the cloth for a long time before unwrapping it. When her fingers met the fabric, they trembled. She held it up, the skirt fluttering in the breeze from the half-open window. The color reminded her of the sky just before rain. The little flowers reminded her of something lost to time, her mother's laughter, maybe. But as soon as the warmth crept into her chest, another feeling followed, fear. No one had ever given her something so beautiful. It felt dangerous. She folded the dress quickly, almost shamefully, and tucked it into the bottom drawer beneath a stack of faded wraps. Then she closed the drawer and said nothing. That night, Sefu stirred millet by the fire while Leya prepared the plates. She moved more slowly than usual. Her mind was loud, filled with questions she didn't know how to ask. As she set the plates down, Sefu finally spoke, his back still turned. "If you don't want to wear it, that's fine," he said. "But I want you to know, you deserve beautiful things." Leya froze. The sentence landed like soft thunder, quiet but echoing. Her mouth opened slightly but nothing came. She sat across from him and picked at her food. Her chest felt heavy. Not from sadness but from something deeper. She had never been told she deserved anything. Certainly not beauty. "I'm not," she began then stopped. "I'm not worthy of that." Sefu stopped stirring. He looked at her, not with pity but with truth. "You're worthy of respect. And of choice." That was all he said. Then he returned to his meal. But that night, Leya didn't sleep right away. She lay on her side, watching the moonlight spill across the floorboards. Those words, respect and choice, circled her like wind around a flame. They burned but they didn't hurt. 2 days later, on a quiet afternoon, she washed the dress by hand. She didn't tell anyone. She used ash soap and rinsed it carefully like it was a sacred thing. Then she hung it on the line, watching it sway in the breeze like a flag she didn't know she was allowed to fly. She didn't wear it the next day, or the day after that, but she looked at it often. And one morning, without a special reason, she put it on. No one commented. No one clapped. But when she stepped outside to sweep the porch, the sky looked a little bluer. The soil smelled a little sweeter. And when Sefu saw her walk across the yard in that dress, barefoot, steady, quiet. He didn't say a word. Because some beauty doesn't need permission. And some healing wears blue. The blue dress changed nothing, and yet, everything. Leya didn't wear it to be admired. She didn't float across the porch expecting praise. In fact, she hardly looked up. But the dress, hanging soft against her body, made her feel less like an echo and more like a person. Each time the wind caught its hem, she remembered something small but vital. She had chosen to wear it. That morning, as she washed the breakfast plates under the shade of the neem tree, her voice returned. Not loud or purposeful, just a hum rising unbidden from her chest. A tune her mother used to sing. She didn't even realize she was doing it at first. But Sefu, standing nearby, did. He paused, listening, then quietly walked away, leaving her to her song. Later that day, while putting away dried beans in the cupboard, Leya murmured something almost to herself. My mother liked dresses like this. Blue ones with little flowers. She didn't expect a reply, and Sefu didn't offer one. But in the silence that followed, she felt seen. Not watched, seen. Time at the farm moved like a slow drumbeat. Days melted into one another. The sound of roosters at dawn, the soft scrape of hoes in the field, the scent of firewood in the kitchen. It was a rhythm that asked nothing but consistency. And Leya gave it, not out of obedience but out of peace. She began tending the garden behind the house, a small patch overtaken by weeds. Each morning she knelt in the soil, pulling roots with her bare hands. Her fingers, once cracked from scrubbing pots in Halima's house, now pressed gently into the dirt. She planted cassava and spinach, and even scattered a handful of marigold seeds she found in a rusted tin box. It was while clearing a pile of dry twigs near the back fence that she saw it. A flower. Simple. Yellow. Small. It grew stubbornly from a patch of neglected soil, surrounded by broken bricks and the remnants of an old chicken coop. Its petals fluttered in the breeze like a tiny banner of defiance. Leya knelt beside it. She stared for a long time, the air thick with memory. Then she whispered, not to anyone in particular, maybe not even aloud, "My mother loved these." The words came out soft but full, like breath after holding it too long. It was the first time she had spoken of her mother since leaving Halima's house. She sat there for a while, knees hugged to her chest, the flower between her feet. There was no audience. No performance. Just the wind and the earth and the tiny miracle of something growing in a place where nothing should have survived. When Sefu returned from the field that evening, clothes dusted with dry soil and sweat shining on his brow, he paused. There, in the garden, Leya knelt, holding the small flower like it might crumble if she let go. She didn't try to hide it. She didn't look ashamed. It was her favorite flower, she said when she noticed him watching. She used to say they only grow where the earth still has a heart. Sefu didn't speak right away. He crouched beside her, pulled out his pocket knife, and gently dug a small hole next to the spot where the flower had grown wild. "Let's plant it again," he said. Leya nodded. Together they tucked the flower back into the soil, covering its roots, pressing the earth down gently with their palms. Then she fetched water and they watched as the soil drank deeply. It wasn't just a flower. It was a memory. A bridge. A small offering to a past that still ached but no longer ruled. After that day, Leya's humming returned more often. She hummed while washing, while cooking, even while tending the fire. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. But it was hers. At the market the gossip still fluttered. But it had lost its venom. Some of the women now greeted her with restrained nods. Others simply stopped whispering when she walked by. Not out of fear but respect. Because a girl who once bent beneath the weight of cruelty now walked with calm purpose. And people noticed. At night, Leya would sit on the bench under the mango tree, wrapped in a shawl, looking up at the sky. Sometimes she spoke to herself. Other times she just listened, to the wind, to the crickets, to her own quiet thoughts. Sefu never interrupted her. Instead, he sat nearby, not too close, not too far, hands resting on his knees, watching the horizon as though waiting for something. And maybe in their silence they both knew. Some flowers don't bloom for attention. They bloom because they survived. And survival, when shared in silence, is its own kind of love. The sky over Kumbesa had a strange mood that day, clouds that looked tired, wind that seemed to carry unfinished sentences. Leya noticed it the moment she stepped into the yard, broom in hand, her blue dress gently swaying at her knees. Something in the air told her the past was stirring. She just didn't know how close it had come. Word traveled fast in villages, even faster than wind. A hunched man had been spotted at the market, a man with cracked heels, a sun-worn face, and a cloth bundle slung over his shoulder. He wasn't alone. In his arms was a baby boy, too thin, too quiet, his cries swallowed by the sound of goats and traders bartering yams. Some recognized the man immediately. Nuru, Leya's father. The one who had vanished when she was barely a child. The man who had handed her over to Halima like a burden, then disappeared without a trace. He hadn't written, hadn't asked, hadn't looked back, and now he returned. Not proud, not powerful, but broken. Bones poking through his shirt. Shame hanging on him like a second skin. He begged at 2 stalls. Bought nothing. The baby whimpered, sucking on its fist. Nuru's cough rattled through his chest. No one offered help. Some turned away. Others spat at his feet. A few muttered, "He's got gall," showing his face after all these years. Sefu saw him too. He stood at a distance near the grain sacks, arms crossed, saying nothing. But his jaw tightened. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, just as the shadows began to stretch long across the farmland, a low whistle came from the gate. Sefu looked up from where he was repairing a cracked bucket. A man leaned against the post, unrecognizable at first glance, but something in the eyes, sunken and frantic, gave him away. Nuru stepped forward with hesitation, the baby still in his arms, eyes scanning the yard like a beggar seeking mercy. "They told me," Nuru rasped, his voice barely more than gravel. "They told me she's here. Leya. I'm not asking for much. Just shelter. A corner to rest. For a night. Maybe 2. Sefu didn't reply. He stood slowly, wiped his hands on his trousers, and looked at the man without anger, but without softness either. "She's here," he said. "But she's not a child anymore. She has a home now. And a name. And she doesn't belong to you." Nuru bowed his head. The baby whimpered. Dust blew across the yard like a response from the earth itself. Then the door opened. Leya stepped out. The breeze caught her shawl. The blue dress still clung to her like a shield of dignity. She didn't stumble. She didn't run. She stood in the doorway, calm, strong, steady. It was Nuru who trembled. His eyes widened as he tried to recognize the girl he once abandoned. His lips moved but no sound came. And then the tears did. "Leya," he whispered. I was wrong. Forgive me." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes moved to the child in his arms. The boy was maybe 2 years old, thin, scared, hungry. "He needs food," she said. Then she turned and went inside. Sefu stepped aside as she passed. Minutes later she returned with a plate, warm rice, beans, a piece of dried fish, and a clean cloth. She set it on the stool near the tree and nodded toward it. Nuru didn't dare ask for more. He sat. He ate slowly, each bite filled with shame and silence. Leya didn't watch. She had already gone back inside. There was no shouting. No slap. No breakdown. Just quiet justice. That night, Nuru slept on the porch, baby curled against his chest. Sefu brought him a blanket, rough but clean. He didn't say a word. It wasn't for Nuru. It was for the child. By morning the porch was empty. No note. No goodbye. Leya said nothing. She simply resumed her chores, sweeping the yard, folding clean clothes, feeding the goats. But in the way she moved, in the way she poured water into the flower bed, Sefu saw something unshakable. The past had returned. And it had found her unbroken. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with fire or fists. Sometimes it comes with rice on a plate, silence like stone, and the quiet power of a woman who no longer has to raise her voice to be heard. The earth was dry again. Weeks had passed since the last proper rain, and the skies remained clear, too clear. At dawn, the cracked soil of Sefu's fields mirrored the veins on old hands, tired, stretched, and trembling with expectation. In the village, people whispered about drought. They counted sacks of grain like treasure and measured hope by the size of their water pots. But Leya didn't worry. Not because she didn't care, but because she had learned the power of small things. The planting of a seed, the sharing of a meal, the folding of cloth with care. Each act was her way of refusing despair. While the earth waited for rain, she kept sweeping the yard. She cooked millet and tended the chickens. She watered her small garden with bowls fetched by hand, never wasting a drop. Sefu watched her. From the field, from the porch, from the corner of his eye. And it was from that same porch one dusty afternoon that he saw the shadow reappear. Halima. Not the Halima of the market days, loud, heavy with judgment, gold bangles clinking. No. This woman was thinner, bent, barefoot. Her dress hung off her like loose skin, and her eyes, once filled with fire, now looked hollow and starved. Hunger and shame walked beside her like loyal dogs. She stopped at the gate and did not knock. Leya was kneading dough inside. She turned when the breeze shifted, felt something stir in her gut. A smell. A stillness. She walked to the door and opened it slowly. Their eyes met. Halima didn't speak at first. Her mouth opened, closed. Finally her voice came, cracked and barely above a whisper. "I need food." Leya said nothing. Halima lowered her head. "I have nothing. Nothing left." The words fell like stones. She, who had once commanded the house, once spat orders like venom, now stood stripped of all pretense. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply stood there empty. Leya looked at her. For a long time. Then she turned and went inside. The fire was still warm. The pot still simmered. She ladled rice and beans onto a plate, added a slice of roasted cassava, covered it with a clean cloth and placed it on a tray. Then she returned to the door and handed it to the woman who had once made her sleep on the floor. Halima took the tray with both hands. Her fingers trembled. She opened her mouth to say something, but no sound came. "You can sit under the mango tree," Leya said. Halima nodded. She walked slowly across the yard and sat on the bench where goats used to graze. She ate with small bites, her shoulders hunched not from the sun, but from the weight of everything she had done. Sefu watched from a distance. He didn't interfere. He knew this moment didn't belong to him. It belonged to Leya. When the plate was empty, Halima sat a while longer, staring at the ground. Then she stood. She didn't approach the house again. She turned to leave, her bare feet kicking up dust with each step. But before she reached the gate, she paused. "I don't know why you don't hate me," she said, not looking back. Leya stood at the threshold, the blue dress fluttering around her knees. She waited a beat, then answered, "Because whoever carries hate has no room left to plant peace." And with that she stepped inside, leaving the door open behind her. No one knew where Halima went after that. Some said she wandered to a neighboring village. Others believed she returned to the ruined house where her laughter once ruled. But the truth didn't matter. What mattered was this: the girl she had once treated like a curse had fed her. With clean food. With no cruelty. With dignity. That day something final ended. Not with a scream, not with punishment, but with grace. That night, Leya sat on the porch, a clay cup of hibiscus tea in her hands. Sefu brought his own cup and sat beside her. "You had more courage today than most people find in a lifetime," he said. She didn't answer. But she looked at him. And in her eyes, there was a different kind of light, one that came not from triumph, but from the quiet freedom of having chosen peace when she could have chosen vengeance. Because real power doesn't come from payback. It comes from walking away stronger than the one who tried to break you. The sun had punished the land for weeks. Every morning, Leya stepped onto the porch and saw the soil stretch and crack, begging for water. The mango tree dropped leaves early. The garden withered despite her careful watering. Even the chickens clucked with less enthusiasm, and the goats lingered by the water basin longer than usual, searching for more. In the village, murmurs of drought turned into anxious meetings. Elders paced the square. Women dug deeper into dry wells. Children were warned not to waste even a drop. But at Sefu's farm no one panicked. Leya moved with the same rhythm she always had, sweeping, boiling water, folding clean linen with calm hands. "Why aren't you afraid?" Sefu asked her one evening as they shelled maize in the courtyard. Leya paused, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Because I've already survived worse," she said simply. Sefu didn't reply. He looked at her, this woman who had once arrived in silence and bruises, and now sat beside him with quiet resilience. Her strength wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was the kind that seeped into everything she touched. Even in drought she made things grow. That night the air was heavier than usual. The wind stilled. The crickets went quiet. Leya lay awake, feeling something pressing against the world. Pause. A promise. And then it came. The first raindrop struck the tin roof like a single knock. Then another. Then a rhythm, soft at first like fingertips drumming on skin. Within minutes, the sky opened wide and wept. Leya leapt from her bed and rushed to the window. Rain poured from the heavens in sheets. She ran to shut the shutters but stopped short. She stood barefoot at the door, her blue dress clinging to her knees, and watched as the water swept across the yard, washing away the dust, softening the soil, singing on the roof. Behind her, Sefu opened his door and stepped onto the porch, arms crossed. He didn't wear a coat. Didn't run for shelter. He let the rain soak into his shirt and skin like a blessing long overdue. They stood in silence, side by side as the rain fell harder, cleansing everything. The soil drank greedily. By morning the world had changed. Green returned like an old friend. The garden, once brown and stubborn, pulsed with color. The marigolds Leya had nearly given up on stood taller. The cassava leaves stretched open, drinking in the light. The corn stalks held their heads higher. Even the chickens sang louder. Sefu walked the fields with cautious hope. The beans were pushing through the dust. The yam mounds softened. And everywhere he looked there was life. "You got lucky," a neighbor said, stopping by the fence. Rain came just in time. Sefu only smiled. He knew it wasn't luck. It was peace. The peace that came from routine. From care. From Leya. Because since the day she stepped into his home, nothing had moved with haste. Everything was planted, tended, waited for. She didn't pray out loud or light candles. But every time she cooked, it was with intention. Every time she folded the laundry, it was with gentleness. And somehow, that filled the house with the kind of grace that even drought respected. That week the harvest came early. Baskets overflowed with maize. The goats grew rounder. The kitchen smelled of ripe fruit and roasted groundnuts. Leya filled jars with grain, humming as she worked. Sefu watched her from the doorway. He never interrupted. He just stood there, feeling something inside him shift. One afternoon, while gathering cassava from the garden, Leya paused. Her hands were covered in soil. Her face glistened with sweat. But something had settled in her, like a truth she could finally speak. She looked up at Sefu, who was carrying a basket across the yard. Her voice was clear. "Do you still want to buy me?" He stopped, turned slowly. The question wasn't angry, wasn't wounded. It was soft, curious, like someone looking back on a road already traveled and trying to name it. He set the basket down and met her gaze. His voice came steady. "No, I don't want to buy you." He took a step closer. "I want to share life, but only if you want to." Leya didn't speak. Not right away. But she smiled. And in that smile there was no fear. No shame. Just certainty. She had survived the beating, the silence, the drought, and now she stood whole. Not owned. Not owed. But free. And ready, finally, to choose. There was no music. No crowd. No feast laid out beneath the sun. The day Leya made her choice didn't come wrapped in ceremony. It arrived like all other days had. Simple, quiet, and thick with meaning. The morning air was soft, and the breeze carried the scent of firewood and boiled maize. The house was clean. The porch swept. Life had resumed its rhythm. But something was different. Inside, Leya stood before the cracked mirror in her room, adjusting the blue dress. It was no longer new, no longer perfect. A seam had come undone near the shoulder. The color had faded slightly from many washes. But it was still hers. And when she looked at herself, she saw a woman. Not a servant. Not a possession. A woman with a name. A voice. A past that no longer defined her. And a future she could finally claim. Outside, Sefu chopped firewood. He paused when he saw her step into the yard, the dress catching the light. She walked slowly, barefoot, her hair wrapped in a soft cloth. She carried no tray. No broom. No task. Just herself. She sat beside him on the bench under the old mango tree, the same tree where Halima had once eaten in silence. The same tree under which Leya had fed goats as a girl, watched skies during drought and waited out rain. It had witnessed every stage of her life. And now it would witness her becoming. They sat in silence for a while. The chickens clucked softly nearby. The goats nibbled at dry leaves. The mangoes hung high, not yet ripe, but firm and promising. Then Leya turned to him. "When you first brought me here, I thought it was just another cage," she said, her voice steady. "A quieter one. A cleaner one. But still a cage." Sefu nodded. He didn't interrupt. "But you never closed the door," she continued. "You never asked for anything in return. You just left space for me. And I didn't know what to do with space. It scared me." Sefu looked at her, his expression unreadable. The axe still rested at his feet, untouched. "And now?" he asked. "Now," she breathed in. "I'm not afraid anymore." He shifted slightly, eyes still on her. "I know you're not a man of many words," she said, a faint smile pulling at her lips. "But if I say yes, if I choose to stay, not as someone rescued but as someone who belongs, what would you say?" Sefu leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. He looked out over the fields, where green had returned, where the marigolds swayed in the breeze. "I would say this," he began, "that I don't want to be the man who saved you. I want to be the man who walks beside you. No promises of love. No dramatic declarations. Just truth. Honest, worn, and strong." Leya reached down, plucked a fallen mango leaf from the ground, and traced its veins with her fingers. "I thought I'd be someone else's burden for the rest of my life," she said. "But I'm not. Not anymore." She turned to him fully, her back straight, her shoulders square. "I choose to stay. Not because I owe you, but because I want to." The words felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of something vast and unfamiliar. But Sefu didn't move to hold her, didn't rush forward. He simply smiled, soft and crooked, and said, "Then we walk forward. Together." That evening, Leya baked bread with fresh rosemary. Sefu fetched water from the stream. They ate on the porch under the tree, the stars overhead blinking like old friends. There were no fireworks, no loud voices, just the occasional crackle of firewood, the flicker of flame light, and the scent of something whole rising between them. She looked over at him, then down at her calloused hands, stained with flour and memory. "I never thought peace would look like this," she murmured. Sefu didn't answer with words. He reached for the kettle, poured them both cups of tea, and placed hers gently beside her hand. Because sometimes peace doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It arrives in warm bread, in shared silence, in the act of sitting beside someone and knowing you're no longer alone. The sun cast long golden shadows across the field, washing the earth in warmth and quiet. Everything on the farm seemed to hold its breath. The goats stood lazily under the neem tree. Chickens pecked at scattered millet. The old windmill creaked only once, then fell still again. Even the bees moved slower, as if the day asked them to be gentler. Inside the house, Leya folded a clean cotton dress, a plain one this time, not blue but soft and neat. On the bed beside it was a matching wrap, a set of bangles carved from wood, and a string of dried flower beads she had made from the fallen blooms under the marigolds. There was no veil, no makeup, no silver jewelry, only grace. She smoothed her palms down the fabric and exhaled. Outside, Sefu was repairing the door latch with quiet concentration. He had washed his shirt, white with faint brown stitching at the edges, and left it to dry in the sun earlier that morning. Now he wore it, careful not to wrinkle the fabric. His hair was freshly cut, his sandals tied tight. He didn't fidget, didn't ask questions. This was not a wedding. This was a witnessing. Word had spread in the village, not by invitation but through whispers. "He's taking the girl," some said. "They're doing it under the mango tree." And though many expected drama, most came out of curiosity, especially the women. The same ones who once gossiped at the water well now stood at a distance, their arms folded, their faces unreadable. But none of them spoke, because something about the way Sefu and Leya moved silenced even the sharpest tongues. They met beneath the mango tree, the one that had witnessed everything. Leya walked barefoot, her cotton dress swaying just above her ankles. Sefu stood waiting, hands folded in front of him, hat off, his eyes soft but sure. No one led her down an aisle. No one gave her away. She had already given herself back to herself. Auntie Malaya, the oldest midwife in the village, stepped forward. She held no book, wore no robe, but her hands had delivered every child born in Kumbesa for nearly 30 years. If anyone knew how to bless a beginning, it was her. She raised one hand, not high, just enough. "May what began in silence bloom in truth," she said. "May the wounds you carry become roots that ground your joy. And may your home be more than shelter, may it be sanctuary." Then she stepped back. No applause followed. But something shifted in the crowd. Heads bowed. Shoulders softened. Even the mango tree dropped a leaf, gently, as if in quiet agreement. Leya and Sefu turned toward each other. They didn't kiss. They didn't recite vows. But their eyes met with full hearts and empty hands. It was enough. Afterwards, the villagers slowly drifted away. A few women offered small nods to Leya. A younger girl whispered, "She looked like a queen," to her sister. An old Mama Cato, who once scoffed at the idea of that beaten girl staying on the farm, shook her head and muttered, "Maybe she wasn't so broken after all." Halima didn't attend. No one expected her to. She had disappeared weeks ago, last seen walking toward the northern trail with a torn wrap and a face carved by regret. Leya didn't speak her name and she didn't need to. Some ghosts don't need banishing. Time does the work. Nuru, her father, was rumored to be sleeping under the eaves of the old market shed, still wandering, still lost. He did not come either. And Leya never locked the door again. Because forgiveness, she had learned, wasn't opening your arms, it was no longer needing to close them. Back at the house, the fire burned steady. The scent of rosemary hung in the air. Leya sat on the porch with her feet tucked beneath her, a book open on her lap. Sefu sat beside her, sharpening a blade in silence. At one point she turned to him and said, "I thought I would live and die in someone else's shadow." Sefu looked at her, then at the light that danced on her cheekbones, her jawline, her hands. "You don't cast a shadow," he said. "You carry your own sun." Leya didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because the life they had wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And sometimes that's the holiest kind of union of all. The days after the ceremony passed without disruption. No grand change swept over the farm. No banners, no feasts. And yet everything felt new. The routines remained, feeding chickens, sweeping the porch, gathering herbs, but something beneath it all had shifted. Leya noticed it in the smallest things. The way Sefu said her name now, not just as a word but as a grounding. "Leya, can you pass the salt?" "Leya, the goats are restless." "Leya." Always with a tone that recognized her, not as a guest or an obligation, but as someone who belonged. The way she said her own name too changed. Once she had spoken it only when forced. In the village it used to fall from her lips like a confession or worse, an apology. But now it was different. When asked at the market, "Who are you?" she no longer hesitated. "I'm Leya," she said clearly. "From Sefu's farm." Not Sefu's girl. Not Halima's burden. Just Leya. That clarity brought with it an ease. She found herself singing again. Real songs this time, ones her mother used to sing while grinding cassava or rinsing clothes at the riverbank. Sometimes Sefu would listen from the yard, never commenting, just letting the music drift through the walls like incense. The garden bloomed wildly. The marigolds that had barely survived the drought now spilled over the path. Leya added new crops, bitterleaf, okra, a few wild yam vines. She carved small wooden markers and stuck them in the soil, writing the names of the plants by hand. Each label felt like an act of reclamation. Naming things. Claiming space. One afternoon while sorting beans on the porch she paused. "Sefu," she said, eyes not leaving her hands. "If I had never followed you that day, what would have happened to me?" He didn't answer immediately. He set down the rope he was braiding and looked at her. "I don't know," he said. "But I know what didn't happen. No one else came." Leya nodded. The answer didn't sting. It felt true. That was the kind of man Sefu was. Never making himself a hero, only offering space for others to become themselves. That evening Leya sat outside alone. The sky was peach and gold, streaked with charcoal clouds. She wrapped a shawl over her shoulders and stared at the horizon, eyes filled with a quiet question. Not of doubt, but of possibility. She had lived so long in survival mode that now, with safety wrapped around her, her body didn't know what to do. But her spirit did. That night she dreamed of her mother. Not as she was in the final years, frail, silent, already half gone, but younger, laughing by the river. In the dream, her mother handed her a folded cloth and said, "Make your own name soft enough to sleep in." Leya woke with the sunrise and tears in her eyes. Not sorrowful tears. Restorative ones. The next day she walked into the village wearing her blue dress, not because it was special but because it felt like a flag of her truth. The same women who once whispered now offered small smiles. Auntie Fari even asked, "What herbs do you use to make your soup so fragrant?" Leya smiled. "I use the ones that grow closest to the ground." "Good ones," Fari muttered. "They're the strongest." A few children trailed after her on the way home asking questions. "Do you live far? Did you really plant all those flowers? Can you show us how?" Leya promised to teach them on Sunday. When she returned to the farm, Sefu was trimming vines near the fence. She joined him in silence, kneeling beside the garden bed. "Did they ask about us?" he asked. Leya smiled as she dug her fingers into the soft earth. "No. They asked about the flowers." And somehow that felt more important. Because she didn't want her story to be a tragedy rescued by a man. She wanted it to be a song of someone who planted herself, watered her own roots, and grew. And now, as the days unfolded, she knew. She had become that woman. Not in spite of the silence, but because of what she found inside it. The mornings had taken on a rhythm that felt eternal. Leya woke before the rooster now, not out of obligation but out of desire. She enjoyed the quiet before the world stirred, the whisper of wind through the mango leaves, the soft cluck of sleepy chickens, the warmth of firewood catching flame in the kitchen. She moved through the house with calm certainty. Her feet knew where each plank creaked, her hands knew which bowls belonged to which shelf. Every object in Sefu's home had once belonged only to him. Now they belonged to them. Outside the crops had flourished. The rains had come and stayed just long enough. The corn was tall. The cassava was firm. The beans hung fat on the vine. Even the goats seemed to strut with more pride. It was harvest time. And unlike the seasons of her past, this one came without dread. She and Sefu worked side by side. He carried the heavier baskets. She sorted and shelled with skillful hands. They didn't need to speak much. Their silence was no longer born of uncertainty, it was a language. One late afternoon, while gathering bundles of cassava, Leya stood still in the middle of the field. The sun warmed her shoulders. The scent of earth rose rich and clean around her. She looked down at her hands, covered in soil, her fingernails dark with honest labor. Then she looked at Sefu walking a few paces ahead, a full basket balanced on his shoulder, his brow glistening with sweat. She took a breath and called out, "Sefu?" He stopped and turned. She wiped her forehead with her forearm, her breath slow. "Do you remember when I followed you from the market?" He gave a small nod. She stepped forward, brushing her hand across the corn stalks as she walked. "You didn't ask me to. You just walked and I followed." "I didn't expect you to," he replied. "I didn't know what to expect at all." She paused beside him. "Back then, I didn't know what freedom was. I thought it was something someone else gave you." "And now?" he asked. "Now I know. Freedom is something you keep for yourself." "But love?" she trailed off. "Love is what happens when someone sees your freedom and doesn't try to take it." Sefu didn't respond immediately. He bent down, placed the basket on the ground and straightened. His eyes met hers, calm and steady. "I don't want to take your freedom," he said. "I want to walk with it." Leya smiled. Not the shy smile of the girl who once trembled under Halima's wrath. Not the grateful smile of the girl rescued in silence. But the full, sure smile of a woman who had survived every version of herself, and chosen the one who stood now in a field of her own harvest. They stood there for a while not speaking. The wind rustled the maize leaves. A bee buzzed past. A bird dipped low before soaring high again. Sefu reached for her hand, not pulling her forward, but simply touching her fingertips with his. Leya laced her fingers with his. And just like that, the past no longer had any hold. That evening they sat under the mango tree, sharing roasted yam and tea. The stars emerged slowly, one by one, as if showing up for them. The world was still. Sefu leaned back and said, "You changed this place. You changed me." Leya shook her head. "No," she said. "I just made room for peace. You already had the soil." He looked at her, eyes soft. "And you were the seed." "No," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. "I was the rain." And they both knew that was true. For all that had grown between them, for all that had healed, it wasn't from rescue. It wasn't from debt. It was from choosing peace. From choosing to stay. From letting things take root without force. And this harvest of grace was theirs. Together. The farm awoke gently on the day the seasons officially turned. The air was cool but not cold, and a golden light poured through the leaves as if the sky itself had been saving up this warmth for them. The harvest had been stored. The land was resting. And so were they, Leya and Sefu, not in idleness, but in the kind of stillness earned only after long, honest labor. Leya sat on the porch with a book in her lap. She wasn't reading. Not yet. She was listening, to the soft creak of the wooden beams, to the chickens scuttling around the yard, to the rhythm of her own breathing. Peace, she had learned, wasn't silence. It was the presence of nothing missing. Inside, the house smelled of rosemary and roasted cassava. A kettle whistled on the fire. The windows were open, curtains billowing. Her blue dress, mended 3 times now, hung on the back of the chair like a flag of who she had been, and who she still was. Sefu came around from the back, hands dusty from trimming the yam vines. He sat beside her without a word, took a sip from the cup she had set out for him and leaned back. They didn't need to speak. Their silences had become sacred, not from discomfort but from understanding. After a while, Leya said, "I thought I'd be a servant for the rest of my life." Sefu turned to her slowly. "I thought that was all I was meant for," she continued. "That the only way to survive was to become small, to disappear." She turned her gaze out toward the field. "But now I am a woman. A woman with her own name. Her own hands. Her own home." Sefu didn't respond immediately. He didn't offer reassurance or praise. Instead, he reached for her hand, not to hold it tightly, but to rest his own lightly over hers. She looked down at their fingers. How different this touch was from all the others in her past. No claiming. No grasping. Just presence. "I see you," he said quietly. "Every day I see you." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness but from something larger. Something that comes when a person who was once treated like nothing begins to understand they were always something sacred. They sat for a long time, the sun warming their feet. No one came to visit. No one needed to. The quiet stretched long and sweet. In the distance, the mango tree stood tall, shading the earth where so much had begun and ended. Beneath it, the soil was darker, richer, from where they had watered, planted, mourned, and forgiven. Leya rose slowly and walked to the tree. Sefu followed a few steps behind. She bent down and touched the base, where a few marigolds had taken root, wild, bold, refusing to stay hidden. She smiled and began to hum. A soft, sweet tune her mother once sang, back before the world broke open. Sefu leaned against the trunk, arms folded, watching her with quiet awe. "You built a home," he said after a while. She shook her head. "We did." "No," he replied. "You turned 4 walls and a field into something alive. You made space for peace. You made room for me." She stood and walked over to him. They stood face to face under the wide canopy of the tree. No crowd, no witness, no song. Just 2 people who had chosen each other, not out of desperation but out of truth. And that, Leya thought, was what mattered most. Not that she was saved, but that she had survived. That she had stayed. That she had made something of her pain, not to carry it like a badge but to plant it, water it, and let it become something soft and good. The breeze picked up. A single mango leaf twirled in the air before landing at their feet. They looked at it together, then at each other. No vows. No declarations. Just presence. And that was the miracle. Not escape. Not revenge. But peace that stayed. Love that stayed. A life, finally, that belonged to her.